Hello everybody and welcome back to the Read a Book Everyday Challenge. Today we're talking about our read for day 4, which was the entirety of SenLinYu's Alchemised. And it actually sounds crazy to say. But yeah, I read Alchemised in 12 hours. So I guess I've got that claim to fame now. I had saved this for a weekend, so I knew I would have more time to dedicate to the read. Glad I did that, but not so glad that I neglected to start until gone 4:30, because that meant that I was up very, very late to finish this book. And just to clarify, when I say I'm reading a book every day, to me, the day starts when I rise and ends when I go to bed. So some days, yes, can be longer than others if necessary. I was done with this a little after 4 in the morning. So if I seem a little low energy today, it's because I am genuinely quite tired. I'm a minimum 8 hours of sleep a night girly, and last night I got like 5. And that was even letting myself lay in. But I've got to tell you now, blitzing through this book to get it done in 12 hours for this challenge was not easy, but I've done it. And I'm very proud of myself. Now, originally, when I thought I'd be doing these videos every single day, I was like, great, I'll do overall thoughts, positives, then things that I didn't love so much, and then final thoughts. And we are actually technically yet to follow that structure at all. So let's give it a crack with Alchemised. For those of you who aren't familiar, Alchemised is a traditionally published version of the world-famous fanfiction Manacled, which, yes, is Dramini fanfiction. I do not like people who dismiss that, because I think fanfiction is a very valid form of literature. To anyone who is dismissive of fanfiction and its quality, I simply ask, hey, what did you think of Paradise Lost? Because Paradise Lost by John Milton, which is generally considered an amazing entry into the British canon, 'tis a classic. That's just Bible fanfiction. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. But yeah, John Milton's Paradise Lost, it's literally just Bible fanfiction. So if you turn around and say Paradise Lost is a valid piece of literature, which, let me make clear, the academic institutions here in the United Kingdom definitely do, because I did a very canonical English degree and I studied John Milton's Paradise Lost. So even though I wasn't a massive fanfiction girly, I have so much respect for the creativity and the passion that imbues fanfiction projects. And when you talk about fanfiction, Manacled, the piece that this is a traditionally published version of, is held in incredibly high regard. And I'm going to start this video off by saying I never read Manacled. To be perfectly honest, I don't think I've ever read fanfiction. Your gal was on AO3, your gal was on Wattpad, but I generally preferred reading original pieces of content. It's how I first started talking to Beth Recalls, actually. I used to chat to her in the comments of chapters of The Kissing Booth as that came out. That was my experience with those apps and those websites. Anyway, I just want to make clear that I was not a Dramini fanfiction girly. So I went into Alchemised with no previous experience of the fanfiction text this was translating, and I'm really glad of that, because it meant I came to this text willing to accept it for what it is, which is a book, a traditionally published book, which exists sans most clear explicit references to the source material that this is source material references. It is quite a fun exercise, as someone who is not familiar with Manacled but has read the Harry Potter books, to read this, because it is full of allusions to its original source. But that's what they are. You can see character inspirations and setting inspirations, but that's about it. And they actually scratch this really pleasant place in the back of your head that most literary allusions do. When people ask me about studying English literature as a topic at university, the main pro I can give it is that it has made me a far better technical reader. And by that, I simply mean one of the greatest things you can do to become a good reader is to read voraciously, to read a lot, to read broadly. And what very canonical traditional English literature degrees do is they force you to read, analyse and become familiar with the big uns, the pieces of work that are referenced over and over and over again and are alluded to intentionally and unintentionally in subsequent pieces of literature. And what that means is sometimes you read a book and you just get something. Something is mentioned, there is a little reference, and you have a second of feeling really, really good. And you go, oh, I know where that comes from. I get a whole extra layer of meaning because I know all of the subtext and clues that by using this particular word or phrase or piece of imagery gives this book. A great example, in seeing as this is a kind of dark academia aesthetic for a decent chunk of it, even though it is a wartime epic fantasy, is Babel or Babel by R.F. Kuang, because I went to an event that R.F. Kuang was speaking at, and I'm talking to the girls around me, we were talking about Babel, and some of them went, yeah, I really love the word. And I turned around and was like, well, yeah, it's the tower. Everyone's like, no, yeah, like, it's the tower in the book, but, like, where did she get Babel from? And I'm sort of going, the Tower of Babel, from the Bible. And none of them had ever heard of it. And I went, this is a book about the act of translation. And that story from the Bible is meant to be about the creation of language, and that it is a punishment to humanity so that you cannot work together. Like the creation of language is devised by God so that humans cannot work together to create a tower tall enough to reach heaven in the sky. Like, they're building that tower, and he knocks it down and invents language so that these people cannot work together cohesively. Like, the symbolism is there. And then we're talking about language and translation in this book. That's a really important thing. And no one around me got it. And I realised it's because none of them had read the Bible. And I understand loads of people would say, well, why would I read the Bible? But one of the best things you can do as a reader, especially if you're reading a lot of traditional Western literature, is read the Bible. Just because it's the most alluded to text. Literally, there are references to the Bible in everything. And because throughout generations and generations, so many people were familiar with that text, we're actually at the point now where people make biblical references and they don't know that those images or those assets originally came from the Bible. Do you know how many people were like, I really love the cover of Twilight? And it's like, yes, there's biblical imagery in the cover of Twilight. And people go, what? It's just really, really funny to me. And once you are aware, like, I'll use the Bible as an example just because it's so frequently referenced. I see it all the time. Once I've read the Bible, kind of all I saw for a really long period of time was the Bible and stuff. Subsequently, every time you get an allusion, you clock it in a book, you get this little dose of serotonin that makes you go, oh, I got it. I'm in on the joke. I knew what you meant when you said this. And that is a fantastic feeling. And for so many people, the allusions in this to its original source material, the Harry Potter books, which so many people are going to be familiar with, that is a very accessible text. They will elicit that response. The response that I am so fortunate enough to see pretty much every time I read a book, whether it's a reference to something biblical, something classical, even elements of Norse mythos and things like that, things that I have studied in an academic capacity. You know, it's such an amazing feeling. And so I know loads of people are coming online talking about this book and they want to discuss it completely sans reference to J.K. Rowling or any of her works. I'm not going to do that. I don't see the value in doing that. This book would not exist without Joanne's work. And honestly, I finished this book and I thought, do you know what? Regardless of everything else that's gone on, as a creative, as a human being, to know that you've not only created your own art, but you've inspired art of this caliber, there must be no feeling like it. Because this is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it would be wrong to not acknowledge that some of my experience reading this book was definitely enhanced by the constant little associations I could make in my mind, going, I know where that comes from, I know where that comes from. It's imbued. It's a fundamental part of this book. And I'm not going to come on here and pretend that it isn't. This was fan fiction. It was Harry Potter Dramini fanfiction, and anyone who tries to pretend otherwise is trying to strip this of a layer that I think will give people not just enjoyment, but quite an important literary experience. The clocking of allusions and references in a text, and the way that makes you feel included and connected to the material, the characters, the world, and the writer. You know, you're reading this book and you're aware that you've read something that someone this talented, an author this brilliant, has also read. You have that in common. That's so cool. Devoid yourself of what you like, what you don't like, what you want to boycott, what you don't want to boycott. This in no way financially benefits J.K. Rowling. So I think people who don't want to talk about Alchemised because of that are being silly. I'd never tell anyone what they should and shouldn't read, but I do think if your reason for A, not reading this, or B, reading it and then refusing to discuss this text, which has its own amazing literary merits, I think that is short-sighted. I fundamentally disagree with it, and I'm going to make the conscious choice to acknowledge what this is and praise this piece of literature. Without the things that came before it, it would not exist. And I'm sorry, but this book right here, this chunky boy, It 100% deserves to exist. I get the hype now. It was amazing. So let's chat about things that I liked. Number one being the structure of this book. I was talking about this earlier on TikTok Live today, and I described it to people as basically, it's the length of about 4 normal books, and it can be split into 3, because it is. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 2 is about the length of 2 conventional novels, hence why I say it's about 4 books long. Book 1 is incredibly dark. I think it's a very good introduction to the world. It is bleak, it is rough going, but it is phenomenal. That on its own, as a little standalone narrative, I was like, wow, we have done a lot. That feels almost like a complete book. Part 1 was big, it was chunky, and it gave me a lot. Part 2 of this book is transcendent. For those of you unfamiliar with Manacled, or who hadn't had people talk about the structure of this before reading it, like I did, might not know, the first section of this book takes place in the quote-unquote present of this high fantasy magical setting. And Helena, the main character, is basically found in essentially a Faraday cage that is preserving her, but she's been left in there completely conscious for like a year. And when they retrieve her, they struggle to find documentation about who she was. They just know that she was a part of this resistance. We are now in a post-war kind of period. She doesn't seem to officially be very senior. But when they examine her, taking her out of the pod, they find that there is a magical enchantment on her head that has basically wiped a ton of memories. So the assumption is she must know something important. We don't know what it is, but we know it is of value because someone has tried to remove it from her brain. Part 1 of the book focuses on her basically being tortured and assaulted, and they try to basically uncover what is in her brain whilst also getting her into this reproduction program. It is really tough going. But you are introduced to Farron, who is this new evil regime's kind of second-in-command guy. He is put in charge of unlocking her memories. She's staying with him. He is evil, and you have a really rough time. I'm not gonna lie. That first book in here, if you are not super familiar with literature of a darker nature, if you've never read anything like a dark romance before, I think you are going to find that really tough. I thought it was phenomenal. We were really running the gamut, and it's really important that people online do call this a dark romance. Okay, I have seen so many people come online and they are trying to distance this book from that phrase. As someone who knows what the words mean, this book right here is a dark romance. Do not let people tell you it isn't. The reason people are trying to distance this book from the phrase dark romance is because there are misogynistic and dismissive attitudes towards books called romances. But the classification of a book as a romance guarantees you a happily ever after. To be a romance novel, a book has to have a primary narrative focus on a love story, and the book has to end with those people happily ever after, or at least in some iteration of a happily ever after in which they get to be together. What that does is it creates something very, very important and valuable to, I would say, society as a whole, because romance is the only literary genre that is a literal safe space. There is a guaranteed good ending for you when a book is technically and truthfully a romance. This then allows authors to run you the emotional gamut, okay? And it is why dark romance is such a phenomenal literary genre. This is a brilliant dark romance, and I want people to call it what it is, because things in this book are so dark. They are so sad. They are so horrible to experience. But as a reader, you go through all of this with a guarantee, an explicit guarantee, because this book is a romance, that it will end okay. You have a promise, a clear, explicit promise that all of the suffering you will go through, the act of catharsis, has a reward, it has a payoff, and that's so important. It's why I love romance. And people don't want to call this a dark romance because they're snobs. You'll hear phrases like epic fantasy, and the setting is an epic high fantasy narrative, but it is a dark romance, and I'm going to stress the word dark. This book will not be for everybody. But part 2 of this narrative shifts from being, really a bleak dark romance focus to a sweeping, magnificent, epic love story. against the backdrop of war and tragedy and loss. And I'm even getting emotional talking about it now. It is phenomenal. Part 2 of this book is one of the best romances I've ever read. And I have read an awful lot of romances. Part 3 of the story then returns to the present day with the entirety of part 1 completely recontextualized, and symbolically that's really, really, really important because the book ends, this isn't like too much of a spoiler, but the book ends with a couple of jumps forward in time, so that the last thing you see in this book is the next generation looking back at literature about the war in this book and knowing that what is written down on the page isn't 100% reflective of what really happened. And you yourself, whilst reading this book, experience the fact that what happens in part 1 does happen. But it is also not the only thing that happens. And knowing the context, the history, everything else that has gone on completely reframes what you know to be true because you saw it happen in part 1. The truth, while the truth can also change given context and understanding. The actions taken by certain people in part 1 can be looked through with completely different eyes when reflected back upon. And the narrative then chooses to end upon reflection of war reporting, the narratives made about a battle, a war, the people who were there, with the knowledge that that isn't reflecting truth, or at least the real truth that matters. It's brilliant, and structurally this book has a point, it has a message, it is salient, and it is powerful. I loved the characters in this. I could see the clear inspirations, like that's probably the strongest illusionary mechanism that kept digging in the back of my head. I could see who had been inspired by existing characters from J.K. Rowling's world. And I actually really loved what SenLinYu has done with them, because these characters were brilliant, completely devoid of what other literature comes before. And everything in this book does. This book completely can stand on its own without any understanding of any Harry Potter material at all. This is just a brilliant book. But when you are familiar with the source material, I could quite clearly see, okay, in the fanfiction, this character was this character. And let's be clear, all the characters were fantastic. They were brilliant. They had so much depth. Some of them were so tragic. This is a narrative that leans into friendship, truth, freedom, and love. And the characters were the main tool to help convey that. The setting is another thing I absolutely adored. And this is where you get to see SenLinYu's real, I guess, creativity. This is what makes this book something completely separate and distinct from its source material. Because whilst you still have this dark academia aesthetic, we go really dark. We go high fantasy. We go traditional European-centric fantasy aesthetic, but with all of the colours muted and drained from it. This cover, I think, does a really good job of depicting the aesthetic of the book. We're walking through ruins, dilapidated buildings, a world full of war and famine and struggle and abuse and necromancy, literal necromancy. It's edgy, it's dark, it's guttural and visceral and elevated. And that, I think, was truly unique. I've never read a book that looked and felt like this. And I guess the last thing I have to say that I just came away and I was blown away by is SenLinYu's writing. A little factoid about myself, I do not have books. And until reading this book, I never understood people who did. But there were lines in this book that the moment I read them, I thought, oh my God, I want to remember that. In fact, there is a line on page 666, because I remembered the number for obvious reasons. I was like, remember that page, remember that phrase, because it was really simple. There it is. Oh, I might cry, because I just thought it was so sweet. And it's the backdrop of the suffering that makes the sweet thing sweeter. Oh, he says to her, oh, Cain, who's Farron, the bad guy, who is a little bit, it's a fair bit more than that. He says, you don't have to be lonely, because you're mine. There were just so many. I was reading this book and I was like, damn it, they've got me. SenLinYu's got me. That's brilliant. Truly, truly brilliant. And the fact that there were phrases and little points of this that I didn't want to forget, considering I read so much, really lets you know this cut through, that this really got me on every level. This book is so successful. On to the things that I didn't love, and I've got to put my hands up and say this is not on SenLinYu. This is on me. I wish with every fibre of my being I did not include this in my read a book everyday challenge, because I was reading part 2 of this book and I looked up from the page and I went, I don't want to rush this. I don't want to blitz through this. I want to savour this reading experience, because this book is worth it. This book will take most people a long time to read, right? It is over 1,000 pages, and I just wanted to sit in it. I wish I'd given myself the whole weekend to read this, because I'll never be able to read it for the first time ever again. Oh, it's even made me sad. I'm mad at myself because this deserved more than I had to give it. Time, focus, energy, attention. I finished this book and then sat there, full sense of denouement. There's a reason the end of a book is called A Little Death. And I just sat there, like, gone 4:40 in the morning. I was like, oh, now what? Now I'm done. And I just feel like that is what I'm going to be sat with. I could have had 2 perfect, brilliant days of reading this, and I condensed it into 12 hours, and I'm never going to get that back. So really, my only negative should really highlight to you how goddamn brilliant this book is. I don't want to over-egg it, but I think this isn't a book to be dismissive of. This is a book worthy of so much praise. I loved this. I love it. I think it's one of the best books I've ever read. And something I was talking to my mum about this morning is that it reminded me of the very, very first time I ever read a book that was 1,000 pages long. Because that was Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, and I was 11. And it was the longest book I had ever read, and it took me a month. It had been my nan's favourite book. My nan passed away. My granddad bought me a copy and asked me to read it, and asked me to think about why my nanny had loved that book so much. So it was the very, very first book I ever, in my entire life, properly read critically. I opened that cover with a question in mind. Why did my nanny like this book? And I still have that copy of Gone with the Wind. Is one of my... Oh, I'll get emotional again. Oh, sorry, I'm emotional and I'm tired. But yeah, that book, and even thinking, like being made to think about that, how proud I felt, how that really led me to think about, well, how brilliant is it that this author has got me to like a character that I don't like and want the best for them? Actually think about the skill of writing a book. Like, wow, Margaret Mitchell made me want Scarlett and Rhett to end up together, even though Scarlett is horrible. That then continued on into me reading the classics and going, God, I really love Wuthering Heights. I love it because I somehow have been put in a situation as a reader where I want Cathy and Heathcliff together, even though I don't like Cathy and I don't like Heathcliff. I want that romance. To then wanting to study English literature at university, to them becoming a professional book content creator and being here today, almost 17 years to the dot later, in a position where I can read a book of the same length in 12 hours. That's how much better of a reader I am now. And it comes from reading one book with questions in mind. So on a personal, emotional level, I had that experience post-reading, and I won't forget that. That felt, for me as a reader, quite important. You know, look at me now. That kind of sensation. My overall thoughts on this book are, it was brilliant. One of the best things I've ever read in my life. And I'm not saying that as a Harry Potter fan, because I wouldn't have described myself as being one. That isn't coming as a fan fiction fan, you know. I was never a big fan fiction reader, even though I have so much respect for the quality and the passion of fan fiction. I think it is so valid a form of expression. I think it is a brilliant form of literature. I'm saying that as someone who came into this book wanting to like it, wanting to have a good time, knowing that other people had told me loads of positive things about it, and that other people were really excited. And now I sit here and I put my hands up and say, yeah, I get it. I get it now. This deserved to be physically printed, readily accessible, a book that people can wrap their hands around and fall in love with. It is painful. It is exquisite. The sensation of reading this book, to me, felt like the first time you actually have a good wine pairing with dinner. Because until you have a good wine pairing with a meal, you think wine snobs are really pretentious. I'll put my hands up. I have friends who are proper wine people, and as someone who doesn't really drink wine, I never got it. Until I am at this chateau in the south of France. A private chef has cooked a gorgeous meal, and the wine pairing was perfect. And I sat on that veranda, literal candlelight bathing everything, and I got it, and I went, oh, this is it. This is worth it. I get it now. And obviously in that framing, a lot of it is wrapped up in ideas of expense and class, but that sensation of, nah, this is a good thing and I get it now. And I didn't get it before. And now I know that this exists. I know this experience can exist. This is worth money and time and effort to have, to get, to make, to find out and discover. The experience of enjoying this is so marvelous and all-encompassing, and my life is better for it now than it was before. That's what reading Alchemised felt like to me. There's a me before reading this book and there's a me after reading this book, and I am grateful for the experience of having read it. I just wish I hadn't read the entire thing in 12 hours. I wish I had savoured the experience more because the quality was so good. I cannot recommend this book enough. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It more than deserves to exist. It deserves to be exalted and it deserves to be read. So if it's on your TBR, if you've been thinking about putting it on your TBR, I promise you reading this will not be time wasted. It was brilliant, and I hope this video encourages you to read it because it was really, really, really good. And now I think I need to read something a little bit lighter, Let's go see what I pick for my day 5 read. But yeah, we are now 4 books in, 2 that ended up being all right, but 2 that have been truly phenomenal that I've loved. This sensation is why I love doing this challenge, because it's forcing me to pick up books that I have on my TBR and actually just get on with reading them, and I am so much better for it. I'm tired now for day 5, but I am ready to go because it's worth it when you find books like this, for sure. So I guess all else I have to say is thank you so much for watching. If you can, please give this video a like, comment your thoughts on what I've said. You can feel free to disagree with me. I also do have proof in the metadata of the video I shot before I started reading the book and the video I shot when I'd finished reading the book that this came in at literally just under 12 hours because I feel like someone's going to go, yeah, fake news. It's not. That is exactly how long took to read all of this, and I didn't skim. I'm just fast. Thank you so much for watching. If you could give this channel a follow, I'd really appreciate it. These do take time and effort to do, and I would love to grow this account. But all in all, thank you for listening. It's very, very much appreciated. I will speak to you later, alligators. Goodbye for now.